Welcome to the Appeal Training by Asylum Access Thailand. In this session, we will cover the appeal process and how to prepare an appeal statement if you have been rejected by UNHCR. You may be called for an appeal interview. We will cover this topic briefly. First, I would like to talk to you about the process for appealing. The first step is being notified that your application for refugee status has been rejected at first instance. UNHCR will issue you your rejection letter in English and explain that you have been rejected and that you have 30 days to appeal. They will not read the reasons for rejection. If you cannot read your rejection letter or have questions about why you were rejected and how to appeal, please come to AAT. The second step is carefully thinking about whether you should appeal the decision. Make sure you understand the reasons why UNHCR rejected you and think about whether there were misunderstandings. Consider the inconsistencies brought up by UNHCR. Think about the definition of a refugee, which we will cover in a few minutes. If you decide to appeal, the third step is submitting your appeal statement. You must submit an appeal statement within the deadline set in your rejection letter. Make sure that you carefully calculate your deadline from the date of the notification indicated in your rejection letter. In your rejection letter, you will find the number of days that you have to submit an appeal. Usually this is 30 days. The fourth step will be UNHCR's analysis of your case. This is when UNHCR makes a decision on whether your case should be rejected again or whether you should be recognized as a refugee. A different officer will consider the appeal, not the same officer who made the initial decision. UNHCR may call you for an appeal interview. Not all applicants will be called for an appeal interview. The fifth step is getting your appeal decision. If your appeal application is rejected, your case will be closed. You can speak with a case officer at AAT to receive advice on what your options are going forward. If you are recognized as a refugee, the date on your UNHCR card will be updated. Your card will now be valid for 18 months. UNHCR may consider your case for resettlement. Note that not all recognized refugees will be deemed eligible for resettlement. UNHCR does not consider resettlement to be a right.
Generally, individual countries like the United States and Canada offer a small number of places to UNHCR to resettle refugees who are in need of resettlement. These countries will make an independent determination to see whether you are eligible for resettlement to their country. UNHCR does not make this decision, and they cannot force a country to resettle you. If you are found to be eligible for resettlement, you will go through a separate resettlement process with the country's embassy in Thailand. Note that during that time, you are still considered illegal by the Thai authorities and therefore still cannot work legally and are still at risk of arrest and detention.
Now we will talk about the appeal itself. The purpose of the appeal is to try to convince UNHCR that they have made a mistake and that you should be granted refugee status. Whether or not you meet the refugee definition is the only issue relevant to UNHCR. We will talk more about the definition of a refugee later on in this training. You must have at least one reason to appeal UNHCR's decision. We call this reason a basis for appeal. Here are some common bases for appeal. 1. There is a factual error, or so-called error of fact, in your notification letter. 2. You were rejected on the basis of credibility, that is, inconsistencies or lack of detail, and the eligibility officer, or EO, in your interview did not tell you about the inconsistency and give you the opportunity to explain it. 3. You have new evidence to support your claim that you have not given to the UNHCR before. 4. There were serious problems with the process, a so-called lack of procedural fairness, meaning that the RSD interview or process did not allow you to properly present your claim for refugee status. For example, A. You did not understand what was happening because of some problem with interpretation. B. You felt uncomfortable with the conduct or some characteristic of the interviewer or interpreter. C. You did not have an opportunity to present relevant evidence. D. You did not believe that your information would be kept confidential. E. You were asked inappropriate questions. 5. You presented evidence in your registration statement or during your RSD interview that UNHCR did not adequately consider. It is important to understand that UNHCR will not change its decision if you have already presented all the relevant evidence. UNHCR has understood all the facts of your case, and UNHCR has correctly applied the refugee definition to your case. That is why it is very important to understand the refugee definition and be able to apply it to your case.
In assessing your case, UNHCR will determine whether you meet the definition of a refugee. It is important for you to understand the definition of a refugee in order for you to determine which parts of your case will be important to UNHCR. We've divided the definition of a refugee into 8 key elements. You have to meet all 8 key elements in order to be recognized as a refugee. The first element, you are outside of your country. International protection can only apply to you if you are outside of your country of citizenship. The second element, you are genuinely afraid to return to your home country. You fear going back to your country. The third element, you have a good, believable reason to be afraid. In addition to having a genuine fear of going back to your country, you also have to have a good and believable reason to be afraid. This means that your reason to be afraid has to be credible. You must have a well-founded fear. The fourth element, what you are afraid of is something really serious. This has to be more than just being discriminated against or being harassed. What you're afraid of amounts to loss of life, torture, rape, loss of freedom, or a pattern of treatment that makes your life intolerable. The fifth element, you are singled out for this type of treatment because of your race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or your membership in a particular social group. In this element, you have to show that the reason you are being treated badly is connected to either your race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or your membership in a particular social group. It is not enough that you are being treated badly or that you have been harmed. You have to show that this treatment is connected to what we call a convention reason. The sixth element, the government has harmed you, or the government cannot or will not protect you. You must show either that the government has directly harmed you, or if you have not been directly harmed by the government, you have to show that the government is not willing to protect you or cannot protect you. The seventh element, you have to show that it is not reasonable for you to move and be safe in another part of your country. It is not enough to show that you cannot live in a particular city or town. You have to show that if you go back to your country, there's nowhere safe for you to live. Or if there is somewhere safe to live in your country, that is unreasonable to expect you to move to that place. The eighth element, you have to show that if you return to your home country, you will face a future risk of serious harm. If you have been harmed in the past, this is important to tell UNHCR. However, you still need to show that if you return to your home country, you will likely face serious harm again. Let's go over the definition of refugee again. Number 1, you are outside of your country. Number 2, you're genuinely afraid to go back to your country. Number 3, you have a good, believable reason to be afraid. Number 4, what you are afraid of is something really serious. Number 5, you're being singled out for this type of treatment because of your race, nationality, religion, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. Number 6, the government has harmed you, or the government cannot and will not protect you. Number 7, it is unreasonable to ask you to move to a different part of your home country to be safe. Number 8, if you go back to your home country, you will face a future risk of serious harm. Remember, you have to meet all 8 parts in order to be recognized as a refugee. Let's take a look at some examples. Mrs. Lego is from Legoland. She is from a minority race, Legonesian. One day, when she was walking home from the market, a man hit her and stole her purse. She suffered a cut on her head. Mrs. Lego went to the police. The police immediately investigated the incident and arrested the man who attacked her. Mrs. Lego's attacker was imprisoned for his crime for a short time. Mrs. Lego does not believe that an attack will happen again. However, Mrs. Lego decided she did not want to stay in Legoland, so she left for Wonderland 4 months later. Let's go through the elements of the refugee definition to see if Mrs. Lego could be recognized as a refugee. First, you are outside of your country. Here, Mrs. Lego is outside of her country because she left Legoland and has moved to Wonderland. Mrs. Lego meets this element. Second, you are genuinely afraid to return to your home country. Here, it is hard to tell if Mrs. Lego is genuinely afraid to go back to Legoland. Mrs. Lego says that she does not believe that the attack will happen again. So Mrs. Lego is probably not genuinely afraid to go back to Legoland. Mrs. Lego does not meet this element. Third, you have a good, believable reason to be afraid. Here, it does not look like Mrs. Lego has a good and believable reason to be afraid. Mrs. Lego's attacker was arrested and imprisoned. Although he may be out of prison now, there's no reason to suggest he would attack her again. Further, Mrs. Lego does not think she will be attacked again. Mrs. Lego does not meet this element. Fourth, what you are afraid of is something really serious. Here, we could say that Mrs. Lego is afraid that she might be attacked even though this is not likely, because she does not think that she will be attacked again. But let's pretend she's afraid of the attack. We have to look at whether what she's afraid of is something that is really serious. Being a victim of theft is terrible, but it does not amount to loss of life, torture, rape, loss of freedom, or a pattern of treatment that makes life intolerable. Mrs. Lego does not meet this element. Fifth, you're singled out for this type of treatment because of your race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or your membership in a particular social group. Here, we know that Mrs. Lego is a member of a minority race, Legonesian. However, it is not clear whether Mrs. Lego was singled out or targeted by the attacker because of her race. Mrs. Lego was probably not singled out for the attack because of her minority race, because it seems like a random robbery. Mrs. Lego does not meet this element. 6. The government has harmed you, or the government cannot or will not protect you. Here, the government of Legoland has not harmed Mrs. Lego. So we have to determine whether the government cannot or will not protect her. Here, Mrs. Lego went to the police after the attack. The police immediately investigated and arrested the attacker, which ultimately led to the attacker being imprisoned. Here, the government is protecting Mrs. Lego. Mrs. Lego does not meet this element. 7th, you must show that it is not reasonable to ask you to move to and be safe in another part of your country. Here, we have no reason to believe that Mrs. Lego cannot live anywhere else in Legoland. Mrs. Lego does not meet this element. 8th, you have to show that if you return to your home country, you will face a future risk of serious harm. In this case, Mrs. Lego is now in Wonderland. However, there's nothing that suggests that she will face future risks of serious harm if she goes back to Legoland. It looks like it will be safe for Mrs. Lego to go back to Legoland. Mrs. Lego does not meet this element. From our assessment, it looks like Mrs. Lego met only one of the 8 elements of the refugee definition. Mrs. Lego is probably not going to be recognized as a refugee. Let's take a look at another example. Mr. Lego is from Legoland. He is a member of the minority religion Church of Lego Saints. He is a preacher at his local church. One day, men from a well-known extremist organization visited the church and told him that he will be killed if he keeps preaching his faith. They also threatened to kidnap and harm his daughter. He tried to report this to the police, but they did not help him. Instead, they threatened to arrest him because the police are of the opinion that the Church of Lego Saints is not a real religion. Mr. Lego knows that the men who came to his church are very well connected because he had seen them speak in his hometown to large groups of people in public. He was so scared for himself and his family that they went into hiding before fleeing Legoland to go to Wonderland. Let's go through the elements of the refugee definition to see if Mr. Lego could be recognized as a refugee. First, you are outside of your country. Here, Mr. Lego is outside of his country because he left Legoland and has moved to Wonderland. Mr. Lego meets this element. Second, you are genuinely afraid to return to your home country. Here, Mr. Lego's evidence is important. He says he is afraid to go back to Legoland, since he was threatened by members of an extremist organization because he was preaching his faith, and then when he went to the police threatened to arrest him. It looks like there's a good argument that Mr. Lego's statement of being afraid is genuine. Mr. Lego meets the second element. Third, you have a good, believable reason to be afraid. Here, Mr. Lego may have a good and believable reason to be afraid. Mr. Lego was threatened by members of an extremist organization because he was preaching his faith. They also threatened to kidnap and harm his daughter. When he went to the police threatened to arrest him. We could say that Mr. Lego is afraid that the members of the extremist organization would act on their threats, and if they do, Mr. Lego may not be able to seek the protection of the police. These are all good facts, but Mr. Lego will need to provide more detailed information about the threats and about reporting to the police in order to show that he has a good and believable reason to be afraid. For this element, we're going to put maybe. Fourth, what you are afraid of is something that is really serious. Here, we could say that Mr. Lego is afraid that he might be killed by members of an extremist organization. He is also afraid that his daughter might be kidnapped and harmed. Being killed and having your daughter kidnapped are both really serious harms. Further, if the police act under threat to arrest Mr. Lego, then this could result in him being unjustly imprisoned. Being arbitrarily imprisoned is something that is very serious because it results in the loss of many human rights. Based on this, it looks like Mr. Lego probably meets this element. Fifth, you are singled out for this type of treatment because of your race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or your membership in a particular social group. Here, we know that Mr. Lego is a member of a minority religion, Church of Lego Saints. It looks like Mr. Lego was singled out or targeted by the members of the extremist organization because of his religion. Men from the well-known extremist organization came to his church, then threatened to kill him if he keeps preaching his faith. They also threatened to kidnap and harm his daughter. Here, the extremists told Mr. Lego why they were threatening him: because of his religion. The threats are directly related to Mr. Lego's religion, because if Mr. Lego had not been preaching his faith, then the members of the extremist organization would not have threatened him. Further, when Mr. Lego went to the police threatened to arrest Mr. Lego because they were of the belief that Mr. Lego's religion, the Church of Lego Saints, is not a real and valid religion. Here, the threat of the police is directly related to Mr. Lego's religion, because if Mr. Lego had not been a member of the Church of Lego Saints, then the police would not have threatened to arrest him. It looks like Mr. Lego probably meets the fifth element. 6. The government has harmed you, or the government cannot or will not protect you. Here, the government of Legoland has not harmed Mr. Lego. So we have to determine whether the government cannot or will not protect him. Here, Mr. Lego went to the police to report the threats made against him. But the police threatened to arrest Mr. Lego because of his religion instead of helping Mr. Lego by investigating the threats that he received. The police did not help Mr. Lego, and by threatening to arrest him, they showed him that they will not protect him because of his religion. Mr. Lego most likely meets this element, but it would be helpful if he had some evidence of the policeman's actions. If the police in Legoland commonly threaten to arrest or arrest members of the Church of Lego Saints, then this could help Mr. Lego show that there is not a safe place for him to live in Legoland. Here, Mr. Lego will have to give more information to show why he thinks the men from the extremist organization could find him. He will need to give more information about why he believes that the men are well connected. Additionally, current news or information showing that the police regularly threatened to arrest members of his church could help show that Mr. Lego is not safe anywhere in Legoland. For this element, we will say maybe. 8. You have to show that if you return to your home country, you will face a future risk of serious harm. Right now, Mr. Lego is in Wonderland. If he goes back to Legoland, he could say that he will face the same risk as before. However, he will need to provide additional information to show why he thinks that the risks from the threats made by the members of the extremist organization are still a real possibility. Perhaps the members of the extremist organization are still looking for him. If so, He needs to give this information to UNHCR. He also needs to show that the threats of arrest to people from his religion from the police are still ongoing. Perhaps the current situation in Legoland has not changed, or maybe it has gotten better or worse. If there are news articles or reports showing this, then this could help Mr. Lego show that if he returned to his home country, he will face a risk of serious harm in the future. Based on the facts given to us, it is not clear whether Mr. Lego will meet this element. He will need to provide more information. For this element, we will say maybe. From our assessment, it looks like Mr. Lego meets 5 of the 8 elements of the refugee definition. If he's able to provide more information for elements 3, 7, and 8, then he will probably be recognized as a refugee. We will talk about how you can provide more information to show UNHCR that you meet all of the elements of the refugee definition in the next module. Now that you know the elements of the refugee definition, don't forget to take the quiz after this section. See you in the next module.
Now we will talk about some common reasons for rejection. UNHCR will explain the reasons why your application for refugee status was rejected. You will find the explanation in a letter entitled Notification of Decision Letter. We will call this letter the notification. This letter will be issued to you in English only. If you need this letter to be translated into your language, please come visit a case officer at AAT. In this training, I will talk about the most common reasons for rejection. If the reason for rejection you have been given is not covered, please come and speak with a case officer at AAT. First, UNHCR did not consider your information to be reliable or credible. This could be because you provided inconsistent information to UNHCR during your interview or in your registration statement. You gave information that was not consistent with other information available about your country, or you gave information to UNHCR that was not believable or convincing. The notification should explain what information UNHCR did not find credible or believable, and if appropriate, what outside information UNHCR considered when making their decision. If your notification does not have this information, please contact UNHCR or a case officer at AAT. You should explain all inconsistencies pointed out by UNHCR with as much detail as possible. This means telling UNHCR why you believe the interviewer made a mistake in deciding that the statements were inconsistent. For example, if you had problems with your interviewer, if UNHCR did not look at facts or other information that you gave them that explain what happened, or you made a mistake. You should then give UNHCR the correct information, be as detailed as you can, put the information in chronological order whenever possible. If you think you did not make inconsistent statements, explain why. If you are providing new information, explain why you did not provide it before and attach any new relevant documents. Note that if you are going to allege that there were issues at your interview, UNHCR keeps a transcript or a recording of the interview, which they can listen to again. You should be careful about making an exaggerated report about interview problems because it could damage your credibility if it is later found that your allegations are contradicted by the interview record. Second, you did not give sufficiently detailed information to support your claim for refugee status, and you did not give a reason why you could not give more detailed information. This means that UNHCR does not think you gave enough information to convince them that your claim is true or that you meet the definition of a refugee. In the notification, UNHCR should point out specific areas or examples of areas where it needs more information. If you do not understand what information UNHCR needs, you should contact UNHCR or speak with a case officer at AAT. In your appeal statement, you will need to provide more information. Be sure to address all issues that UNHCR listed in the notification, even if you think that that information is not important or you think there's other important information to include. You should write your statement in chronological order. Later, we will discuss how to write in chronological order and how to write a detailed statement. Third, the harm you fear is not a kind of harm or a serious enough harm to meet the Convention definition of persecution, namely a threat to your life, freedom, or fundamental human rights. Examples of persecution include death, torture, rape, slavery, arbitrary arrest or detention, deprivation of legal personality or citizenship, or deprivation of freedom of thought, conscience, or religion. Your appeal statement should make clear why the harm you fear falls into one of these categories. You should highlight all of the information that you have already provided to UNHCR, showing that your life, freedom, or other fundamental human rights are being threatened. You should include any new information showing that you, your family, or people like you are being persecuted in your country. Be sure to tell UNHCR when you are providing any new information and explain to UNHCR why you did not provide this information before. Fourth, the authorities in your home country can protect you. If you are afraid of persecution by people who are not members of the government, like a rebel group, family members, or other religious leaders, UNHCR may believe that the police, army, or other government authorities in your home country will protect you. If you try to get protection from government authorities in your country, your appeal statement should explain when, where, from whom, why you sought protection, and what happened. If you did not seek protection, you should explain why not. If you fear harm from the government, you should explain why. You can use examples in your past as well as examples where government authorities have pursued your family members or other people of similar circumstances in your country. Fifth, you can live in another part of your home country without fear of persecution. If UNHCR has determined that you can live safely in another area of the country, the safe area should be identified in the notification. If not, please contact UNHCR. The safe area must be practical, safe, livable, and accessible for you. It should be reasonably expected that you can move there without undue hardship. If you believe the safe area is in fact not safe or legally accessible, you should explain this in your appeal statement. You should also explain the problems you believe that you will face in the safe area. For example, discrimination, physical insecurity, lack of housing or employment opportunities. Be as detailed as possible. If you are providing new information, please make sure and explain to UNHCR why you did not provide this information before.
One way to give a credible and clear statement is to create a chronological narrative. A chronological narrative simply means that you are telling the story in the order that it happened. Telling your story in this way can help the UNHCR officer understand what has happened to you and also why you should be granted refugee status. Here is an example of a chronological narrative. I will tell you about the meals I ate yesterday in the order that it happened. Yesterday, I ate breakfast at 7:30 in the morning. Around 9:30 in the morning, I had a snack. Around 12:30 in the afternoon, I ate lunch. Between 3 and 4 in the afternoon, I had tea. At 6:30 in the evening, I ate dinner. I have just told you about the meals I had in a chronological order. That is, in the order that it happened. So here you can see that I started out my day by having breakfast at 7:30, followed by a snack at 9:30. After that, I had lunch around 12:30 in the afternoon. Between 3 and 4, I had some tea. And then finally, I had dinner in the evening at around 6:30. Creating a chronological narrative makes it clear when things happened, and it can also help your testimony be less confusing. In order to tell your story in a clear way, you should try to tell your story in the order that it happened. One way to help prepare you for this is to create your own personal timeline. Even if the UNHCR officer is not asking you questions in a chronological order, this exercise can be very useful. Start your timeline with the beginning of your story until the time that you came to Thailand. Include all the events in your life that is important and relevant to your story, and include why you left your country and why it's not safe for you to return. In the last module, we talked about the case of Mr. Lego and how more information probably would help him get refugee status. In assessing your credibility, UNHCR will assess the level of details that you will be able to provide during the interview. One way to determine whether you are providing sufficient detail is to look at whether what you are saying answers the following questions. 1. Are you describing what happened? 2. Did you talk about when it happened? 3. Are you including who was involved in the incident? 4. Did you say where the incident occurred? 5. Why do you think this happened? Let's look at an example. Mr. Lego was threatened by men from a well-known extremist organization who visited his church and told him that he will be killed if he keeps preaching his faith. Let's see if we can answer the questions. 1. Did the statement describe what happened? Here, we can see that Mr. Lego was threatened and he was told that he would be killed. This is a very simplistic way to describe what happened. In order to be believable, Mr. Lego will need to provide more description of what happened. 2. Did you talk about when it happened? Here, we have no idea when the incident happened. This detail will need to be included. 3. Are you including who was involved in the incident? Here we can see that Mr. Lego was threatened by men from a well-known extremist organization. But we do not know anything more about the men or the extremist organization. Mr. Lego will need to provide more information about who was involved in the incident. 4. Did you say where the incident occurred? Here we can see that the incident occurred at Mr. Lego's church, but we don't know the city or the street where the church is located. Mr. Lego will need to provide more information about his church. 5. Why do you think this happened? Here we could infer that Mr. Lego was threatened because he was preaching his faith, but we will need more information to show this. Let's look at another example where sufficient details were given. Mr. Lego was threatened by 3 men from Legolese Nation, a well-known extremist organization. The men were wearing green shirts and green pointed hats that are commonly worn by members of Legolese Nation. They were of medium build, and one man had a long pointed beard. Mr. Lego had seen these men before, speaking at a large public rally against members of the Church of Lego Saints. On 4th of July 2012, around 3 in the afternoon, the men came to the Church of Lego Saints, located on School Street in Lego City. They came right after members of the church left a religious service. The men kicked the door open and broke a piece of the door. They entered the church, screaming, "This is not a true church." Mr. Lego was cleaning up when the men saw him. 2 of the men held his arms, while the man with the pointed beard punched him and yelled, "We will kill you unless you stop preaching this false religion. We know your daughter, and it would be very easy for us to take her away. You do not want to know what we would do to her." Let's see if we can answer the questions again. 1. Are you describing what happened? Here we have more details about what happened to Mr. Lego. We could see that he was threatened by 3 men. We could also see that the men kicked the door open, breaking a piece of the door. They also entered screaming, "This is not a true church." We can also see that 2 men held Mr. Lego's arm, while the man with the pointed beard punched him. Then we find out more detail about the threats. In this scenario, we get a clearer picture of what happened and can imagine how scary the situation is because we have more details. Let's take a look at the next question. 2. Did you talk about when it happened? Here we can see that it happened on July 4th, 2012, around 3 in the afternoon. It happened after members of the church left a religious service. 3. Are you including who was involved in the incident? In this example, we find out more information about who was involved in the incident. We find out that there were 3 men, and we found out the name of the extremist organization. We also get more information about how the men looked. With the name of the extremist organization, it would be easier to find out whether this organization has a wide network in Legoland. 4. Did you say where the incident occurred? Here we find out where the incident occurred. It would be easier to identify which church since we now have a more specific location. We can see that it happened at the Church of Lego Saints on School Street in Lego City. 5. Why do you think this happened? In this example, it is easier for Mr. Lego to show UNHCR why he thinks the incident happened. The men entered the church screaming, "This is not a true church." And the man with the pointed beard told him, "We will kill you unless you stop preaching this false religion." It is reasonable for Mr. Lego to think that the reason he was attacked and threatened was because of his religion. You can see the difference between the first statement and the second statement. The first statement was very general, while the second statement was more detailed. Therefore, it provided a clearer picture of what happened to Mr. Lego. You can see the difference between the first statement and the second statement. The first statement was very general, while the second statement was more detailed. Therefore, it provided a clearer picture of what happened to Mr. Lego. That is the end of this module. Please don't forget to do the quiz, and I will see you in the next module.
Now let's talk about how to structure your appeal statement. One way to make the structure clear to the reader is to use a heading for each section. You can write your statement in your own language. Aim to handwrite no more than 10 to 15 pages, and if you're typing, no more than 10 pages. Although your appeal statement may need to provide more detail to the UNHCR, try not to be repetitive. Say everything only once, but clearly make your point. The following structure will help you do this. First, include a title that clearly identifies the document as an appeal statement. Second, include your biographical information, including your name, your UNHCR number, your date of birth. You can also include your place of birth, nationality, languages spoken, marital status, passport number if you have it, date of arrival in Thailand, date of registration with UNHCR, date of your RSD interview, date of notification, and your contact information. Third, include a short paragraph that clearly states that you intend to appeal the decision made by UNHCR. Fourth, you need to address any issues you had at the interview or with the RSD process. Again, you should be careful about making an exaggerated report about interview problems because it could damage your credibility if it is later found that your allegations are contradicted by interview record. Remember, UNHCR keeps a transcript or recording of the interview, which they can later review. If there were no issues at the interview or with the RSD process, you do not need to include this section. Fifth, include a section for reasons for rejection. Review your notification letter and identify each reasons that UNHCR has rejected you. Write a heading for each of the reasons that UNHCR has given to you, and under each heading explain why UNHCR should reconsider their decision. If you need to, you can watch the part of the video where we talk about the common reasons for rejection again. 6. Include some short background information that could give UNHCR a better picture of who you are and how that might have affected your interview or previous statements that you submitted. For example, include information if you are illiterate, or you did not go to school, or whether you have a disability that prevented you from expressing yourself clearly. 7th, include a section that explains the reasons why you meet the definition of a refugee. Write this portion in chronological order and with specific headings. You can watch the portion of the video where the refugee definition is discussed again if need be. You do not need to repeat all of the facts that you included in your initial statement or earlier in your appeal statement. Instead, you should summarize all of the facts that show that you meet this definition and highlight the facts that clarify that you are a refugee. It is helpful to go through the refugee definition point by point. 8th, even though this is a part of the refugee definition, you should include a separate section to show your fear of return to your home country. Include details that show why you're afraid to go back and any relevant current events that would make it impossible for you to live safely in your home country. 9th, you can also include a short paragraph about your life in Thailand, especially if your life in here has created new circumstances that could make your life in your home country unsafe. 10th, if you're submitting new evidence or information, you should include a section clearly identifying the new evidence or information and explaining why you're submitting them now and why you did not submit them before. You should list all the documents you are submitting and give each document a number. Then write the corresponding number on the top of each document so it's clear. You can resubmit documents as long as they are relevant and they support your statement. Finally, don't forget to sign your appeal. Make sure you write your statement in a neutral tone and avoid using accusatory language or a tone that is too aggressive or emotional. Your goal is to convince the UNHCR to reconsider their decision, not to put them on the defensive. Make sure that your statement is written in a way that is not confusing and that it is logical. Make sure that your statement communicates why you meet all the parts of the refugee definition and all the information that will help UNHCR understand why its initial decision was wrong. Make sure you've only included statements that are true and not exaggerated. Make a copy of the appeal statement for yourself to keep in case you're called in for an appeal interview.
UNHCR might ask you to go for an appeal interview before making a decision on your case. If you believe that you should have another interview with UNHCR to explain your case, make sure to request for an additional interview in your appeal statement. If you provided new information in your appeal statement, UNHCR should interview you to discuss that new information. Because of the large number of appeals to UNHCR, it may take a long time for UNHCR to respond to your appeal application or schedule an interview.